So I'm so glad to be here. It's a very mixed group of people that are here today working in so many facets of the infant mental health and martial arts field, as I've just learned, which is amazing. So I hope that some of what I share today will touch on lots of areas of your life and work together. Therese has a question.
So Lauren, we can see your notes.
I know, I'm working on getting there. It was my share button is hiding. How's that?
Isn't that the nuts?
How's that? Can you see just the slide?
Perfect, thank you.
Perfect.
So, oh my gosh, it was a really long time ago when we started talking about putting this together. And there's so many areas that we could cover when we think about the idea of rupture and the concepts of rupture and repair. And so I thought I would do a couple of things during our time together. We might take some time today to talk about the concepts of rupture and repair across multiple domains, at home and work, and even within ourselves. And I'll take several approaches. I'll talk about some of the nuts and bolts of the idea and the practice, and also try to weave it into how that might all fit into our work in infant mental health. But I'm also hoping that we can use some body-based awareness to think about the internal process and experience that we all feel amidst a relational rupture, and how mindful attunement might help us in those moments in moving towards and through repair. I can't see anything right now other than my slides, and so please just interrupt me, or maybe I can do some things to shift windows a little bit. But if people have questions, and there are designated places too where we'll pause and I'll stop talking so fast, and make sure that people can ask questions or share thoughts as well. Okay. So Jenny did all of my professional introduction, which I really appreciate. And Jenny, you did so much more than the text today. You got all of us organized, so thank you. But I also just want to share a little bit about me personally. I live on the west side of Wisconsin, in La Crosse, and am parent to a now 8-year-old boy. And this is one of my very favorite pictures of him. And so I thought I would throw it up there. And on the 6th or 8th time that I was thinking about what I would say to you all today, I realized that this picture is a beautiful picture. It's doing one of my favorite things, hiking in one of my favorite places in Bryce Canyon in Utah. But it also doesn't really capture, if there was a video of this scene, the multiple ruptures that happened as we walked down and up that trail, that it was hot and it was too far and his backpack was too heavy, and my own expectations that we should be able to go on this beautiful hike and have a peaceful morning as a family. It wasn't always this pretty, right, relationally between us. But luckily, I could do enough to get us through and to work on addressing the little ruptures with little repairs and perhaps little promises of ice cream cones after the hike, to make it workable and make it a good experience, so that we actually have taken subsequent hiking trail or trips since. So hold that in mind, that even when we see these beautiful pictures or talk about beautiful possibilities for repair, it's hard. These are hard things to think about and to approach, and can involve a lot of our own personal history in the moment too, in the here and now. And so it's just good to hold this in mind, that this is hard stuff and it's important, and all we can do is practice and keep trying. Throughout our time together, you'll see pictures of different pieces of special pottery from Japan called kintsugi pottery, which is the art of putting broken pottery pieces back together using gold. And it's really a beautiful metaphor, I think, for embracing our own flaws and imperfections. And in fact, that when we can sort of embrace it and acknowledge the cracks, acknowledge the ruptures, we actually have the capacity to create something even more beautiful. And even the word kintsugi, when I looked it up, I was like, oh, perfect, because it's 2 words together. It's golden and repair. And so we can think about these golden repairs even when there's hard ruptures. One of the artists I read about described his practice and art as saying, you won't realize your full potential until you go through tough times. And I really love that, because I think one of the most important things to know about rupture is that it's normal. Ruptures happen. And so we'll pause. And it happens, and we will get better for it, and we can learn from it and grow from it and face the next thing head on. The concept itself of rupture and repair is rooted in attachment theory, and then has taken root also in the field of psychotherapy. But we're going to take it outside of the therapy office and even outside of a little bit of attachment concepts today, and think about rupture and repair in our own lives, rupture and repair in work, at work sometimes, and even within ourselves. So before I jump into sharing a little bit just more information, I wonder if we all could just take a minute to roll our shoulders back, find our bodies in our chairs or wherever we find ourselves today. And we're going to think about, or invite you to think about, a moment that there was a rupture, a time that you felt misunderstood, or you misunderstood your child or partner or work partner. Think about what it felt like in your body. Some of us might go to a place of feeling shut down or numb. Others might feel fired up for a fight. We might have wanted to run and hide, or felt that deep pit of discomfort in our gut. It's really important to know that all of these feelings are important cues for us, and whatever feelings come up are okay. Just like we talk about with the children in our lives, it's what's important is then figuring out what to do next. If you've contributed to or initiated the rupture, that frozen feeling might come up too. That wish that maybe if we just pretended it didn't happen, things will smooth over and it'll be okay. On the other hand, sometimes we feel like nothing will feel right or okay until it's addressed. And the other thing that I hold in mind is that how past conflict, how past ruptures have gone for us, all the way back to when we were very, very little, informs a lot about how we're going to proceed in this moment, in this conflict, or in future ruptures. We carry it with us. So if we were to think forward beyond past that rupture, that moment in time, we hopefully had an opportunity to move towards repair. Or we can think about the next time we have an opportunity to move towards repair. And we might wonder, what would we need in that moment, or in those next few steps or hours or days and weeks time together? What would we need to have an open and honest, respectful conversation with that person? And what would we need, or who would we need maybe to help us with that process? When we can do the work of sort of mindfully checking in with how are we, what's coming up, what do I need? When the moment of conflict comes, whether we've been misunderstood or a big rupture has happened, or when we've had our own lapse, we can find ways to repair and strengthen our relationships. And what we know from attachment theory is that actually stronger relationships come out of repairs. And so although ruptures don't feel great, the repair actually can build stronger, healthier relationships in the long run. And we'll talk about how it can even flow from there into future relationships. Okay. So why would we even talk about this? Why is it important? As I said before, it's really important to start with the shared understanding that ruptures, or just disagreements, breakdowns in communication, or harder things, are really common, normal, and expected. And that a rupture, what I mean by rupture is that when it's the moments when we suffer a loss of trust in another person, usually the big ones are with someone that we really thought, that we believe can be kind and understanding and understand us. These can be very small, like a child's cues being momentarily misread or misinterpreted. And if they're not caught, you might get to that tantrum place. And they can feel very big, like a young child witnessing a very dramatic argument between parents. There's a whole range in there, right? And that's just at home. Moving through that, if we were moving to thinking about a shared understanding of what I mean by repair, it's the work that's needed to regain trust and mutual understanding. The work that could get us to a place where we can sort of restore that belief that the other can be a good enough interpreter of our needs. And I also want to connect the concept of rupture and repair to the thinking behind what an internal working model is, which is that foundational set of expectations and beliefs about how relationships are going to go. So it's kind of that working mindset that we've developed over time, starting from when we were very, very young, about our kind of go-to beliefs about how relationships are going to go. And so if we were raised in a setting or a series of environments where even when there was tough stuff, we had an attuned adult caregiver most of the time who could kind of understand what was going and help us get through it, we start to believe that that template is going to fit other future relationships as well. But if there have been harder, unresolved things along the way, we might start to develop a more fixed belief that when there is interpersonal conflict or danger, we're not sure if we can believe that it's going to be okay after that. Bowlby would tell us that internal working model becomes a template for future relationships and helps us then anticipate the future. And so when we're doing repairs, whether that's with a very young child, or even with a fully grown colleague, we can still contribute to a more positive sense of an internal working model. That's a good thing to think about. If we were to go even more to the basics, we think about building blocks of healthy attachment, of which rupture and repair is an important one. But we also want to make sure that contributing to healthy attachment is consistent and responsive caregiving, that we're seeing partners in attachment that delight in each other, and that the bigger, more responsible person originally has a capacity or is developing a capacity for reflective functioning that then eventually becomes shared as that little person grows and starts to be able to understand the other. So I want to talk about another really big why for me of not just that ruptures happen, but that repairs are kind of magic. Repairs are opportunity to deepen connection within that relationship with the person or people that there's been a rupture. But it's also, and you'll hear me refer to this throughout our time together today, something we could think of as magic that travels. Because I think that these repairs that we're doing interpersonally not only build that relationship, but then can sort of bridge out into our internal working models or just relationships with other people across our day, across our world and lifespan. We also know that repairs build our capacity and build our children's capacity to tolerate negative affect, because as we're building that belief that I know this is really hard right now, but I'm starting to trust that even in hard things, we can get through it and make it okay or make it better. That means that when I am feeling uncomfortable in the future, or like I'm not getting my needs met right now, or not feeling heard or understood, I can hold in mind at the same time, but I do think it will get better, because a lot of times someone's been there to help me through this, right? This is not going to be a life-ending, overwhelming, intense feeling situation that will never resolve. It's magic that travels because we can start to apply it to the rest of our relationships and hard times. It's also magic that travels because I do think then we can take that capacity and belief into perhaps our work with our colleagues, with our clients at work, with our supervisors or supervisees, and start to develop a capacity to do repairs there as well when things are hard. So it can really build resilience. Ed Tronick is the primary researcher that did all of the still-faced video experiments with babies, very young babies and their moms, where the mom would get very still and the baby would make lots of efforts to sort of re-engage with that mom. And it can be really painful to watch, right? I mean, it's the definition, the video definition of a rupture, of that baby going, what is going on? You were just here with me. But also he was able to show just how quickly that with the return to attunement, babies and moms could feel reconnected and the baby would start to regulate, right? And his research over time, along with many other people, has shown that great caregiving relationships between babies and parents, that caregiver, that primary caregiver, might be attuned like 30% of the time. So the other 70% of the time, someone is distracted, or there's been a misattunement, or they're just not attending to each other, or it's worse and dramatic. And these kids do okay, right? These are kids in secure relationships. So I want you to hold on to that when you're thinking about if you're being hard on yourself for a rupture or a hard moment, to remember that, right, like 70% of the time, it doesn't look perfect. It doesn't even look good enough attuned sometimes. He also just wrote a beautiful new book, if this is interesting, if this is an interesting topic, which I highly recommend. It's called The Power of Discord. And it really talks actually about the importance of rupture, not just repair, but actually rupture. He read it with a pediatrician, and it's fabulous. So look it up. I'll have a slide at the end with a reference. Okay, so we're going to talk about ruptures at home, and then we'll have a space to pause. But before I jump in, any questions or feedback so far? If I can see our faces. I think we're okay.
Yeah, I think we're all good, Lauren. I'm
Thank
not seeing
you.
anything in the chat or anything.
Okay.
I'll keep an eye out, and I'll interrupt you if someone pops on.
So by ruptures at home, I'm really talking about ruptures in our immediate families and communities, right? That could be in our household or outside, of course. And there is a wide variety of ruptures that we might be holding in mind, right? From the very, very benign misunderstandings, differing priorities between what dad needs to do in that very moment and getting ready for the next day, and what that kiddo would very much like to have happen in his, handful of play choices. It also can be activities just throughout the day requiring separation, people being dropped off at school, even the day-to-day flow of parents maybe needing autonomous time in the house, at home after work, to sort of re-regulate themselves, different priorities that kids and parents might have throughout the day. It can be misreading or misunderstanding each other, often easily in the moment repairable. You really, really wanted me to like throw that ball back to you, but I kicked it instead, and you didn't like that, right? But you're upset, and now we're going to fix it and get back to the game of catch, right? Affect stays neutral and warm. We can be talking about limit setting ruptures when a parent sets a limit, right? Or even in a romantic relationship, that no, we're not going to do that right now. That's not okay, right? The child, the other person may experience a lot of distress. It is a rupture because we have very different ideas of what should be happening, right? But limit setting does need to happen. Sometimes they're boundary setting. And then we can go all the way to talking about very, very, what some would call toxic ruptures, big fights, where people's, horrible words or physical violence is used. That's intense. The emotional intensity is high, and there is a real solid risk of disconnection between the parent and the child or the partners. Oftentimes someone in there, or perhaps multiple people, are starting to or have lost control of their emotional regulation, and people are moving into the sort of low road state, what Dan Siegel would call the low road state of fight, flight, or freeze. And what can happen with young children when they witness this or are a part of this, that rupture is often accompanied by intense feelings of shame in the moment, because kids are kind of wired to sort of believe that they have a lot to do with the goings on in their world, even if they had very little to do with it. And parents or the adults in those situations can feel shame often much later on. Like, how did I even let that happen? How could that have happened? If parents are also bringing in any sort of history of unresolved childhood trauma or childhood experiences, it can be sort of a boiling pot of harder stuff to kind of come into that moment, and it becomes much more than just the rupture that's happened in this moment, but that whole history of how we think things are going to go from here and now, and how we apprise ourselves. Parents can often wish, or we all can often wish after hard moments like this, that we could just ignore it and it would go away, that maybe the kid will get over it. But there's a real risk here that if we don't eventually, and we'll talk about what to do in between the rupture and the repair, if we don't eventually acknowledge that this hard thing happened, it leaves the child with an even greater sense of disconnection from their own feelings. They're wondering, did that even happen? Is that real? Did I experience that? And can I trust future interactions, or do I need to start sort of developing some maybe hypervigilance about, is that going to happen again? or other strategies to try to like cope with the possible future hard stuff. So then if we move to thinking about the repair piece of it, it's good to know that we're going to sort of grade things, right? The more intense and dysregulated the rupture, the more that's going to be needed to contribute to the repair. But before we get to that repair, before we jump in, feet first, if we're ready, it would be very wise to get a little bit of perspective here, to find a way to get a little bit mindful of how we are and how we're doing, what we need to get back to high road processing, which is instead of being back in our limbic system in that fight or flight or freeze place, getting back upstairs to our prefrontal cortex where we can do a better job reading the situation, attuning to the needs of the other person or people involved, thinking about what's needed or if a break is needed. So it's really important to say, what can I do to regulate and breathe here? How am I doing? What do we need? So if I were to give you some steps, then we would start with hopefully body-based regulation. This hard thing happened, how am I doing? And then eventually mindful regulation, more with a dual focus of not only how am I doing, but what do I see is going on with this little person, with my partner, right? With a family member. How are we both doing? What can I observe and see here? Timing wise, young children, because we know that their sense of time is just much shorter and faster, are going to do better with a sooner repair. On the other hand, if we're not ready to get to a place of regulation, it would probably be better to take the time that we all need to get a little bit more regulated before we start to process, because it's hard to get to places of verbal processing, or even just picking up a young baby and saying, I'm sorry that happened, right? Until we're feeling regulated ourselves. If they're little, get on their level, right? Or bring them to you, seeing eye to eye. Older folks, adults, teenagers are going to need a little bit more space, right? And then when you're ready, it's just nice to acknowledge what happened and acknowledge if there's any regret in there. So just saying, I am so sorry that happened. I was feeling really stressed and I yelled. And now I wish I wouldn't have, but I did, right? How are you feeling? Doing that creates opportunities to listen to the other person or child's experience. And hopefully we can do it without interrogating. It's not about being right or wrong. For us too, we can say like, I regret that happened, but we don't need to go into this big like judgment zone. If it's gotten to the point where we feel like this rupture is beyond anything that should have happened, like I yelled too much or I was too angry or whatever it was, we want to acknowledge that, but we can also say, I am so sorry that happened. And it's hard for me to know this or want to believe this, but even adults can get so mad that they say things or do things that they shouldn't have. I wasn't making good choices. I wasn't thinking clearly. And that starts to help children develop a coherent story about the frightening rupture. So they can start to think to themselves, right. So my mom wishes that didn't happen. It did happen and she got too mad and now she's going to work on doing something different. If you can get to that place in that conversation or the next time when it's the right time to talk, you really can start to talk about what could I have done differently next time, right? Which is building a template for the kiddo too, right? About what might be helpful for them when they have their next rupture. And we can use that repair as an opportunity to grow reflective functioning and empathy and to better understand each other. So saying something like, I was feeling so mad, but underneath it, I was really worried that you were going to get hurt. I yelled at you and then you got really mad too. I'm sorry I yelled. Next time I'm going to try to take some deep breaths. But I also have to make sure you stay safe. It didn't help to yell. What could I do instead next time? So you're using that as like a collaborative process of talking about what might be helpful in the next time. Okay, nuts and bolts of rupture and repair at home. I went a little bit fast. Does that bring up any thoughts or comments or questions? Okay. Okay. So if we were to take it outside of our immediate families and think about rupture and repair within our work, it would be easy to sort of assume that almost all the nuts and bolts of rupture and repair also apply to our relationships at work, both with little people and families or students that we're working with professionally, but also between staff, with your colleagues, and within supervisory relationships. At work, a lot of what I read about and definitely experienced is that ruptures are often related to differences in priorities or needs, stresses, also cultural perspectives and lenses, everything that we carry in to work with us about our identities that might be different from the folks that we're working with or supporting. And we also know that in settings where stress is high, where resources are low, where there's less time and maybe support for supporting reflective practice, more likely that ruptures that happen are probably going to go unaddressed, right? Because people are just doing the best they can in hard situations without a lot of support and attention to saying, let's see what we can do to support people and address hard stuff. Thinking about cultural differences in culture and identity may not only contribute to rupture or just differences in perspectives or opinions or practices, but also differences in what we might need in our approach to repairs with colleagues or with staff, with families. I think it's really important, particularly in just my identity as a white woman, to acknowledge that I have often a therapist with a title, right? I have power and privilege in that role. And that sometimes that is a privilege that could allow me to ignore ruptures or avoid repairs and perpetuate silence. And I think that means I have a greater responsibility to really be on the alert and look out for anything that I have done or have noticed that sort of perpetuates a rupture, and try to create safe opportunities for people that might feel like they don't have my title or they're in the role of a client or a supervisee, to name it. And for me to say, I might miss the boat here sometime. I might miss a really important detail or forget something or miss your priority or perspective. And I hope that eventually you'll know me well enough to know I would much rather know and for us to talk about it together and figure it out. But I know that will take some time for you to trust that I mean it when I say it, right? But I think it's an important responsibility for me. I try to do that at the beginning of work together with folks and also throughout if I think something might be going on. I also try to hold in mind that there could be ruptures that other folks or I am aware of that I perhaps didn't contribute to directly, but come into our work or relationship together. Perhaps there's been historical trauma or just historical ruptures. And so we really want to hold in mind, what awareness do I have of what this person I'm working with or serving might be carrying in their awareness? And what can I do to address anything that needs to be addressed? Like I said, this could be historical trauma or systemic or programmatic practices from the past that participants carry with them that really affects their capacity to trust me, even as a contractor with that agency or something like that. It also could be old practices like the forcing Indigenous peoples to go into boarding schools. And then now I'm working with the current Ho-Chunk family that's enrolling into a white childcare setting. And although there's very little overlap in the systems and practices, there is a lot of overlap in just thinking about the education of young children and the cultural setting that their child is going into. So I want to hold in mind the historical trauma there and the possibility that we may need to just talk about it. We also, in our capacity in this work, will often witness ruptures and repairs or between parents and kids. It's really important that we think about our stance and our own ability to regulate in those moments. we can go back to our beginning of our time together and knowing that ruptures are common, they happen, right? It can be painful to witness a hard rupture or just a tough moment between a parent and child, and they might trigger our own instincts to fix it real fast, right? Or to shut it down or change the subject or to try to rescue the parent or often the child. And we really want to try to slow that down a little bit and take a breath and see what we can do and see if maybe our own capacity to model our own regulation and holding back a little bit and holding that belief, we'll get through this happens, may then give that parent the chance to get a little bit regulated themselves and start to use that higher road functioning. So we could support the parent in doing the repair rather than trying to fix it or avoid it and kind of perpetuate the rupture. These things happen a lot. I used to see it a lot at, I worked in therapeutic preschool, and kids at the end of the day were tired and their parents were probably even more tired. And parent would come in and say, okay, put on your coat. And the kid was like not having it, didn't want to leave for whatever reason. The Duplo blocks were just way too fun, or maybe there's some uncertainty that they're heading into at home, and nothing that parent could do would get the child to put their coat on. And then across the room, a teacher would say, Joshua, put on your coat. And the kid goes, okay. And the parent is crushed, right? And there's that rupture of their parents' belief in themselves that maybe they can give effective requests of their child, or that maybe that teacher is able to do it better than them. And so often I'd want to kind of step in and smooth it over. But what I realized, if I could just look at that mama and say, I know it's hard. Sometimes teachers have teacher magic here that doesn't work for parents, but I know that you're doing the hard work at home every day with them. And I hope it was okay. I know that I could see that look on your face was a little painful. Those are the little things we can do to support regulation and eventually reflective capacity. There's definitely lots of chances in our work, which can feel like high stakes work sometimes, right? For there to be ruptures between staff and clients. Some of that can relate to different priorities and hopes. Perhaps the parent's concerns are much different than the interventionalist that's coming up with a treatment plan. And eventually that parent might start feeling unheard, or perhaps even less interactive during birth to 3 sessions. We know that parents, and often ourselves or our colleagues, are coming into the workplace with multiple stresses, and all of that stress can be carried into our interactions with families. So we'll see a common rupture in daycare settings is that the child and family is frequently arriving wet. Child has a dirty diaper every single time. Parents dashing out the door to try to get to work on time. Teachers are busy getting everything set up for the day. And suddenly there's less and less rapport between the teachers and the families trying to understand how can we sort of come together and figure out this morning or give each other grace or make it work, right? And staff too often share with me when I'm in reflective consultation that feeling of feeling like they're doing a lot, trying to be regular and doing all the good things that we do with reflective practice. But they are starting to feel more disrespected, often because of those multiple stresses that are going on, lead to missed appointments, family not being home for home visits. And so there, I think it's really important to use those tenets of reflective practice to start to think about, okay, so this is a thing that's happening and I'm really glad you acknowledged it. And let's think about a wider net here of all the things that could be contributing to this and the multiple perspectives. And then we can think about how you want to proceed. And it is a rupture. Within supervisory relationships, some clues that a rupture has happened. We can just experience more silences or cancellations, supervisees beginning to feel not comfortable or heard. And on the other end with supervisors, clues that we might need to sort of attend to something that's happened within this relationship. Supervisors can start to talk too much to fill in silences, give more directives than just creating space for curiosity and wondering. And with colleagues, again, that difference in approach. having a harder time not keeping other people's practices, cultural background, priorities, just specialties in mind, all the things, the different areas that we're trained in, are sort of ingredients for ruptures. So switching over, bridging over to repair, if this is a moment where you've witnessed perhaps a repair between, or a rupture with a parent and child, one of the most important things you can do after you've managed to get yourself a little more regulated and check in with, what am I noticing right now? What's happening? Is starting to wonder, what could I do in the moment or after in our work together to support increased reflective capacity? And that might mean eventually doing what CPP, which Child Parent Psychotherapy calls a double scoop intervention, which is modeling empathy both for the parent and the child. So we're going to hold both parents and child's perspective in mind, right? Joshua, you wanted to stay and play. It's been such a fun day and it was hard to say goodbye to school, but mommy knows that there's such important things for you guys to do when you get home. And it's been a long day and everyone's tired. And we're going to try to figure out how to get everyone out the door, right? And then later on, if you continue to work with that family, there's things that you can do to look for opportunities to model repair, or even better, notice what the parent did to keep the child's perspective in mind, or using reflective capacity, what the parent did to support joint regulation. So anything you can narrate in that moment, even when I could tell you were disappointed, you took a deep breath and thanked him for putting his coat on, right? You were doing what you could to stay regulated in a hard situation, and then you moved through it, right? That was hard, I know, and you did it. And so that's sort of modeling a little bit of repair almost, and also recognizing everything that that parent's doing that's working. So more ingredients for repair at work. Allow time. Oh, and I want to say, this is from the Green Book, A Practical Guide to Reflective Supervision, which is on my shelf and usually on my desk weekly because it is just that good. But there's a whole chapter on rupture and repair. And if that feels like an important topic for you, I'd really encourage you to take it out because it goes really beautifully into rupture and repair and the concept of within the context of reflective consultation. But they would say allow time. And so unless it's with a very, very young child, we're usually talking about colleagues or clients here. If there's a rupture, it's probably something that you're going to want to come back to eventually after some regulation can happen or is allowed. People might need a little bit more space. Anything you can do to be genuine and authentic in acknowledging the rupture. They say reflect and then reflect some more, which I like. About this stalemate or anecdote. We want to make sure that we can hold ourselves with respect and also then find that mutual respect for a colleague, a work partner, or family, and respect for the other. We want to make sure we can look for the positives to pull on what's good in this relationship or hard things that we've gone through before. And then create space to kind of discover what we've learned through this rupture, through this hard moment, disagreement, or misunderstanding. We definitely want to try to acknowledge our part in the stalemate and provide an apology if it's needed. Remember, it's not just apologizing for what happened, but talking about what could we do in the future if this happened again. And then they say, when you apologize, begin the steps list here again. So knowing that this is like an ongoing process, especially if it's been a harder misunderstanding or rupture. This is kind of saying the same thing again, but just getting back to that mindful place, apologizing for what happened, naming what happened, owning our role, naming and then absolutely listening for the impact on the other. Exploring for ways to move forward together, and again, giving it time. So back to magic that travels. I think magic that travels or in parallel practice is a beautiful example of how magic can travel, right? Parallel practice is that concept that various people and systems are in relationship and influence one another. And there is the way, and often, sorry, my words are getting messed up here, but oftentimes parallel process refers to how we are in supervision or with our supervisees and how we model rupture and repair, or talking about hard situations, or how we practice thinking about our work together, can flow then into that person's work with families. Maybe that parent then that worker is supporting that can flow into their work with their children. So that's magic that travels, right? And so thinking about if we can model good commitment to repair in our supervisory relationships and our work with colleagues, we can hope then that magic will travel, and the folks that we interact with may be better prepared or have a slightly more supported working model to trust and believe that if they were to come to a hard interaction or moment, they could try out a repair. That's kind of an important thing. And again, I started here a little bit when I talked about my own personal clinical work and work with folks that I provide consultation to. I think it's important to sort of anticipate ruptures. We can hold a belief that there might be a time when we misunderstand or disagree on something, but we can really overtly acknowledge in our beginning work with someone, or even in an ongoing way, there might be a time when I've missed the boat here. I just didn't understand what you were telling me, or something that was so important to you. If that happens, and believe me, I am a bona fide human, I make mistakes. If that happens, I hope you'll let me know and we can figure it out. Okay. Okay. I'm seeing chat happen. Oh, Jenny just put in. Great. Any other questions or thoughts about rupture at work or within our work? Okay. So now we'll small it down a little bit and think about rupture and repair within. And really, I think inner rupture is kind of the definition of shame, right? And when I began to think about our time together, I began to see a lot of the overlays between repair, or rupture and repair, and self-compassion, which is the self-compassion is a concept that's been really pioneered and written and talked about by Kristen Neff and now many others. And so I wondered about how we could connect our thinking today about rupture and repair with self-compassion. So Kristen Neff says self-compassion has 3 parts. It is a shift of moving from self-judgment or shame to self-kindness. It involves actually acknowledging that something hard has happened, and actually many of us have probably experienced something just like this, that suffering is a part of life, and that we are a part of a common humanity that experiences hard things sometimes. And it's a stance of choosing mindfulness over identification. So the working definition of that is, it is the difference between saying I am the worst, right? And something really hard has happened that I am struggling with and I'm going to try to get better at. But right now I know that this is really hard for me, and I'm going to do what I can to take care of myself and then to move forward. So she has a 3-part recipe for self-compassion, and I literally put this on post-it notes for myself and for other folks that I work with sometimes, because we need it. And the first step in that hard moment, we've noticed like an internal really negative thing that we're thinking about ourselves, or thing that we're beating ourselves up for, or perhaps we've participated in a rupture, if we were going to be really like on target today for what we're talking about. The first part is just acknowledging that it's happening. And she would say, like, to herself, this is a moment of suffering. or in more simple language, ouch, this hurts. I am being really hard on myself. Just acknowledging how hard it is can help us pause and realize that actually we need to do something different than just kicking ourselves, because it doesn't really help. The second part she would recommend is reminding ourselves that suffering is a part of life, or simply that mistakes happen. Sometimes I'll say to myself, oh my gosh, my inner critic loves to show up, and I am not alone in these feelings. A friend was texting me and trying to be supportive as I was a little bit nervous before today. And I said, you know, who showed up is my imposter part of me that thinks I don't even know what I'm talking about here or have anything to offer. And so we talked about leaving her in the parking lot, but also I know that's a part of myself. And I'm going to occasionally be nervous sometimes. And then the third part Kristen would suggest to us all is that we find a moment of self-kindness. And so she would say with her hand over her heart, may I be kind to myself. May I give myself the compassion that I need, or whatever I need. May I be patient. May I love and accept myself as I am. And sometimes that kindness might be kind self-talk. Sometimes it might just be finding those soft parts of our arms and touching it and getting a little self-induced oxytocin and warmth, nice brain hormones, brain neurochemicals. Sometimes that kindness might be taking a walk or a breath outside, whatever we need, a glass of water. But what can we do to be kind to ourselves, which actually then helps us prepare to do maybe the hard work of repair. We're going to be in a better place to do it when we can get to a place of self-compassion rather than sort of internal shame or just being really, really hard on ourselves. So let's try it. Remember, I asked you to start to think about when I very first started talking about a hard time, a hard rupture, time when you felt misunderstood or missed the boat with someone else. Let's try a little self-compassion. Think back to that moment and how it felt in your body. And we'll take a moment for self-compassionate thinking. In that moment, or in your next one, you could just acknowledge that this is really hard. This is suffering. I don't feel good about this. We could acknowledge that conflict, that rupture is a part of life, it's a part of every relationship, and that we are not the only person who has messed up, has made a mistake, or is misunderstood. We're not alone. And then we could move to self-kindness. We could hope, may I be kind to myself. May I be patient. May I love and accept myself as I am. And with those three parts, you might hopefully start to notice a small shift from maybe a place of shame or collapse or fear to a place of readiness to think about what do we need, and now eventually what can we do to start to move to a repair. It's not always easy, it's not always simple, but it's definitely possible, especially if you can start with self-compassion. So I'm going to close down. Oh, let me talk about a couple of books here. So the green one is the Practical Guide to Reflective Supervision, and it's wonderful. Kristen Neff's book is literally called Self-Compassion, and now she has a workbook. Ed Tronick and someone Gold, Cynthia Gold maybe, Claudia Gold wrote The Power of Discord. And then here's two other books more in the parenting realm that really take a nice look at infant mental health and rupture and repair and reflective capacities in parenting. So those are 5 beautiful books if that's where you go for knowledge. That's definitely where I go sometimes. But I also really want to talk about a beautiful, beautiful presentation at WI-AIMH that's now happened twice and is now a published article in 0 to 3, which was Aisha Bennett and Jana Hack talking about a hard moment in their relationship, their work together in reflective consultation. That was the masterclass in talking about rupture and repair. And so hopefully you all will have an opportunity to read that article, or to even better hear them talk about their experience together, because I can give you all the information in the world, but I think we were so lucky in Wisconsin to get to learn from Aisha and Jana. And so I really want to mention them here. So I do have some scenarios that we can talk about together, but I really do want to pause and just see what people are noticing or thinking about, or questions that you have for me. And that can be in chat, or you can unmute yourself. Can I please put the link in the chat? Is that for Jana and Aisha's article? Maybe I can dig it up.
Yes,
that's
please.
another question. Yeah. It does require a 0 to 3 membership, sadly, but I bet we could figure out how to get copies. With
Okay,
Jana and
thank you.
Aisha's permission. It's beautiful.
So this is Therese. Thank you very much. I really appreciated your presentation. And when I think about all of this, when you're presenting and it's all written down on paper, it's like, oh, this makes sense.
It's pretty, right? But it's
Yeah.
hard in life.
But it's hard. It's really, really
I
hard.
know.
Wanting to jump in and save something or wanting to smooth over. And what I often think about is how, you know, our own early childhood and our own experience with rupture, you know, has an impact on how we, you know, now interact with rupture and repair. But what I find hope in is that if we start practicing this, you know, our mind shifts, and that it is possible to start new patterns and learn new ways. So I heard, you know, pieces of hope in that, and I really appreciated that.
I will tell you that I'm a bit of an over preparer. And so I started thinking about this a long time ago. And it was like an opportunity to bring mindfulness to all of the ruptures that I was doing with my kiddo and in my life, right? And, you know, friends and family members. I definitely promise you that I did not then better repair every situation, right? But I was more mindfully aware of when things were happening and then started to think about, okay, is this something that I can address right now, or can I work on my own regulation and come back to it? And there was lots of stuff that I started to sort of be a little more attuned to of how my own history was sort of driving the show, or, you know, influencing what I wanted to pay attention to, or who was right in this situation. So yeah, it's so important to know that we're bringing so much beyond that moment of hardness or disconnection from our own past stories. And then it's going to take a lot, right? And just like attunement is only happening 30% of the time, I think we want to really give ourselves a lot of grace about learning about the whens and hows of repair.
Well, I also found it hopeful that you said, you know, that that you know, in any relationship there's going to be rupture.
Absolutely.
You know, relationships are hard, and we can't take them for granted.
Absolutely. And yes, and that rupture can contribute to actually a stronger relationship.
Right.
Because when we practice repairs, it gets stronger, right?
Right.
And it travels to other relationships too.
Right. I have a colleague at 0 to 3 that keeps, you know, one of her mantras is the growth is in the repair.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I'll talk with, because parents bring it up a lot of like, okay, well, I'm doing that thing where I acknowledge the rupture, or I try to do the repair, but also like, I keep doing the hard thing because there's stuff going on, there's stresses going on in their life, or they have past unresolved traumas. And, you know, all we can do is talk about the strength that the capacity that they're building, and acknowledging that it was hard, that they're doing something different, right? We can use a lot of different metaphors. Broken bones usually heal stronger with support, even stronger than they were. And so even if it's a really hard thing, the fact that you are now working on it and trying to acknowledge it and do something different is what matters, right? So thanks for seeing the hope.
Maybe I have more of a question. So, you know, you have parents or whomever are working with people within the same workforce or things. I think the other thing with this is is like taking away that expectation that repair process has to be like the perfect textbook repair process, right?
Yes.
Right. Like this is a skill just like any other that we would have to learn, especially, right, if we didn't have that in our past, we didn't have parents that were like, well, let's talk about this or anything like that. So what would you tell to someone, like, what are the first things, like, just start here with these, like maybe small 1, 2, and 3 things as you get more used to practicing this and using this in your kind of daily life?
I think what you said in there is a beautiful place to start, of just acknowledging you may not have had the template for even how to acknowledge a hard thing that's happened. And like the fact that you are being so brave and even talking about it now, that you want to try something different, which is hard, is beautiful. So that's like acknowledging the history. And then, you know, I often think about, you know, our instructions on an airplane. The first person to get the oxygen is ourselves. The first person to regulate is ourselves, right? If you need more time to get back to it, fine. This is hard, right? And so it might be that later, when everyone's like calm and seatbelted in the car, is the time to start talking about it with our youth kiddo, right?
Wow.
It's okay. Give yourself time. See what you can do to get regulated.
Okay.
And then I think really saying, you know, sometimes we have a belief that if we were to acknowledge that we messed up, that would like be bad. We could be like vulnerable and say, oops, I made a mistake, versus trying out a different stance of actually there could be strength and growth that comes from saying, I am so sorry I yelled like that. I wish I wouldn't have. I'm trying to do it differently, but sometimes that's my go-to, trying to do it differently. How was that for you? Right? So we're gonna acknowledge that it's hard. We're gonna try to get regulated, take time if we need it, and then start to sort of challenge the belief that it would be a bad thing to acknowledge that a rupture even happened. And I hope that that's enough to like at least start the conversation, right?
Yeah. Great, thank you.
I wanted to say a couple things. Hi, Lauren. How are you? Good to see you. Great presentation. Always something to talk about, right? Yeah, I first of all, a couple things. So I loved how Therese mentioned our upbringing, right? Because I think for me that comes up all the time, right? And I'm currently just finishing up capstone, which has been like a year of like deep reflection and thinking and learning. And yeah, I've been just sort of paying attention to some of that, you know. And I grew up in a family where my parents, it's not like it was perfect and it was like this perfect relationship, but when there were ruptures, it was more like mumbling and grumbling, right? Without necessarily like coming back and like talking it through. And I noticed that a bit in myself too, unfortunately, but you know, for step awareness. And I just think that is so important. I'm working with an adult client right now who has a lot of ghosts in her nursery, and it comes up a lot in terms of her own parenting and sort of the way it manifests. So I love the mention of how we were raised and how we sort of learned, right, how to acknowledge conflict. And it's almost like when you have that in your family, you get better at that, right? You get better at checking in and noticing the small stuff first, right? And that's the other thing that I was going to say too. Like, I feel like I'm really good with the small ruptures, right? Like in therapy, if I'm noticing, like if I make a suggestion and there's just a little bit of a change in the facial expression, I might say like, I wonder how that landed. You know, what are you thinking about X, Y, and Z? Then it's very easy. You know what I mean? That's like a very kind of fast little kind of mismatch. Easy repair, but I find the ones that are like more intense than that are more difficult to come back to. But yeah, I'm better when I notice them quicker. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm noticing, you look upset with that, and then we can repair in the moment. I feel like when it sits and it starts to kind of fester, and then there's that awkwardness of coming back together is always really hard.
Yeah. So a couple of things there. There's some just really nice prompts for our own self-reflection, or even clinical work with clients, of just wondering, when hard stuff happened in your family, between like you and your parents, or between your parents, was it ever acknowledged? How was it acknowledged? Right? What does that make you think about? Like, is your comfort zone when hard stuff happens now? Right? So that's just sort of increasing reflective capacity a little bit, and just awareness of what we're carrying with us. And then in the moment, the fact that it is feeling possible to acknowledge the small stuff is wonderful, right? And we all like get to it's just a place of practice that we all practice and try. But of course, the harder ones are harder to acknowledge. And sometimes we don't have the capacity, or the opportunity, I should say, to offer repair, because someone doesn't come back to therapy or disenrolls from the program. And so sometimes we're going to need to either do that attempt at repair internally, in thinking about what did happen, I think, and what do I wish I could say, or perhaps in reflective consultation, or sometimes in an email or a voicemail to a client that might not engage back with you, but you can say, I think something really hard happened between us, and I'm really, really sorry. And I hope that you might at some point feel ready to talk with me about it, or at the very least find the next helpful person or support for your family, and that would be okay with me too. So you're sort of paving the way that you believe that repair is possible, even if they're not wanting or ready to do it with you. And that's okay. Like that's okay. But that can be really helpful, and it's a good use of reflective consultation and supervision, because hard breaks happen badly sometimes, and it can leave a lot unprocessed if we don't have someone to think it through with.
Thankfully, I have really good reflective supervision right now. So
Good.
Yes.
It's something that Wisconsin WI-AIMH has done a beautiful thing, building our capacity to support each other. It's pretty amazing. It's magic, the trust.
So I was thinking along the same lines as, so there's a rupture with a consumer, a client. What happens if there's a rupture with somebody else, like a coworker, or somebody in your own circle, and they're not ready for repair? And any thoughts on that?
Jana and Aisha really talked about that together. They had a real misunderstanding of what a client needed and what Aisha, as her teacher, wanted to do. And it took a long time, and that was okay. Jana was able to hang in there and know that it would take time and sometimes space, and then more opportunities to rebuild trust. And so just trusting that, hard things can happen, and if we can give it hopefully some time and demonstrate our commitment to at least trying or hoping for some healing, that can be a good place to start. Big ruptures might take a lot longer to heal, right? I read a quote the other day. It said, "Trust is earned in teaspoons and lost in buckets," right? And that would
say that again, please.
Trust is earned in teaspoonfuls and lost in bucketfuls. And it may help me think about, like, we're going to need to take a different approach to really hard breaks. Does that answer your question? I think I missed a part of it.
Do anybody else have any reflections or thoughts or questions? What struck you in what Lauren shared today?
There's a lot to percolate. I will send Jenny the slides if that's helpful. Oh, Beth, did you have a thought or a question?
No.
Oh, it's just nice to see your face. And also my email, I suppose, would be helpful if you guys want to reach out with specific questions. That sound okay?
Great, Lauren. Thank you for sharing that. I did have a question from someone if they could get access to your slides. So
Great. I will
Thank
do
you.
that. I will do that. Hi, Stacey.
Hi, greetings from Appleton here with the Gachalpa team. So thank you very much, Lauren, for doing the talk, and WI-AIMH for sponsoring this. I guess my reflections, two things. One, and I know it's so, we all know this, that it's common, but it was just so reinforcing to hear it, because I recently had one in a professional relationship. And again, even though I'm trying to do the self-compassion, right, really went to a lot of shame, blame, trying to sort through that. And then, you know, just again, stepping back here and being able to put it in perspective that, right, that's a part of all relationships, right? No matter what, right, it's probably inevitable that that was going to happen. And I look back to other ruptures that I've gotten through, right, just like you said, and then that's going to be helpful to think about, okay, we're going to work through this, and there's some possibility here. And things do shift, because I think earlier on in my career, well, in just development, right? Or maybe more with my partner too, I usually go into the blame, right? Like see them, right? Or it's more one way or the other, just like, no, I'm right and that person's wrong. And again, from Carol, one of my beautiful mentors, right? I know a lot of you know her, moved out to the West Coast now, right? Would always really look for that benevolence, right? Scoop both, right?
Yes.
So that, right? I'm not all wrong. I'm not all right. The same with them. So can you find that middle ground? Hard to do, but important. So
It's
thank you
hard
for
to
even this
do.
discussion. Yeah, because I think it's helpful to share with others, right? And again, see that we're not the only one who has these experiences.
Yeah. Ruptures happen. We're not alone. We can pull on previous repairs to trust that even in this next hard moment, there is a capacity for healing, or even increased capacity within our relationship to work together. And also, you know, another child parent psychotherapy metaphor is that the bus comes back. And so sometimes we might not have that opportunity to repair in the moment because people aren't ready, or the capacity isn't there, or regulation isn't there. But the big important things in life, of which conflict is one of them, it will come back, and we could find a different regulated mindful moment to start to repair things. And so trying to take away some of the urgency, because if we're not ready, it's not going to be the heal, the repair that we need. Right. And then that last part of acknowledging that we were not 100% right with our partners is an important thing that all of us are working on. Okay.
thank you, Lauren, for sharing your wisdom and facilitating that great discussion. I appreciate it. And I think we will have follow-up if people would like to just connect with you individually too, as we let this kind of percolate, like you said, creating space. Sometimes we need to let things sit, and we will share recording also with a group so that we can re-listen on things as well. So thank you, Lauren. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.